I don't really know what to say about these ones. Like, how did this many situations end up requiring someone to climb a pole? Let's get into it. You better not climb that pole. As a boy growing up in the small town of Wallace, Idaho, my family had a few very clear rules. Finish your meals, be kind to strangers, and by all means, never climb the telephone service pole that was just adjacent to our rancher-style house on the outer edges of Elm Street. A little lad named Calvin, known for being a good boy, I took this to heart. Little did I know that that day my world would change forever. Much like a service pole itself, I would be stood upright, stuck in the ground and face skyward, unable to move from the fear I felt. The metaphor kind of falls apart a bit, but you generally get the idea. I remember that morning something felt off. My young sister, Nanja Ika Rose, who was usually the calmer of us two, seemed perturbed. Instead of playing with our empty Cheerios box, she kept glancing out the front screen door, which was casually clacking open and closed in the moderate Idaho summer breeze. As the moments crept on, I could tell she was going to head outside and that being her older brother, I'd be charged to take care of her. After all, Ma and Pa wouldn't be back for several hours, as they were out brashing the barn with the Douglas family across town. Barns certainly don't brash themselves. Papa always made this very clear. As Nanja Ika Rose stood up and headed out to the front porch, I didn't realize how much what happened next would impact the rest of my life. How frightening it would be, how realistic. I followed her out and saw something that made my stomach tighten into a knot. A group of children were crowded around the service pole. What were they doing? As I approached, I saw something odd. I knew some of these children like Stevie, Roger, and Dogathus. Their eyes looked glazed over like they weren't all there. I felt sick. There was no turning back. Dogathus, what's going on? Is everything okay? No response. As I pushed through the crowd, the most peculiar sensation took over me. I felt like I was half dreaming, like the state I would fall into just between waking day and deep sleep. A sort of autopilot took over me. I felt the presence of something, or someone. It was vaguely familiar somehow. Soon, a strong urge to just surrender to this mysterious force took over. I wanted to be taken over. I wanted to climb the pole. The voice of my grandfather on his deathbed thundered into my head. "You better not climb that pole," were his last words. I often wondered what was missing in our lives, that the significance of avoiding a telephone pole was the main priority for a dying man to communicate to his family. But that was neither here nor there as I watched from an outside view and as my small hands and feet began to ascend the angular metal service rods jutting out from either side of the weathered wooden pole. With each successive step, an interplay of dynamic forces within my body played against each other like the eternal dance of good and evil. I felt exhilaration at the prospect of transcending mortal limitations, tempered back to earth by the grounded shame of disgracing my family legacy. With each step, I was leaving behind my ancestors for want of the gods. I was a blemished bodhisattva, an angel with a filthy face, marinating in the flawed ecstasy of partial awakening. Halfway up the pole, the muttering voices of my zombified friends became quieter, then louder, then a bit quieter, and then a lot louder. They were softly chanting together, "Climb that pole, climb that pole." And that's just what I was doing. I was climbing a roughly 52-foot telephone service pole in a rural town with a population under 1,000 people. This was significant. As I started to near the top, flickers of ordinary consciousness returned. What would happen after this? Would I come back down? If I did, would I be ejected from the family? Or would the town elevate me such that I was regarded as a local hero? Would I become the new mayor, or would I be taken into custody and executed? In retrospect, none of these premises really made a lot of sense given the ultimately inconsequential nature of basically just climbing a pole. But that's not how it felt. As I reached the top, suddenly the presence I felt earlier reached me more directly. I can't explain this in terms people understand for the most part, but it's like it was saying words to me, but through feelings that weren't literal. If I had to break it down, it was saying, now that you've climbed this pole, things will not be the same. You have a greater responsibility. You need to stand strong for your mother and your father. You need to be a champion for the smaller folks like Dogathus and Nanja Ika Rose. But this presence, I'd felt this before, but it couldn't be. Could this be the very man who warned me against climbing the pole? Without even planning it, I heard my mouth curtly say, "Grandpa?" The felt voice suddenly became literal, and in my head I heard these words, "Yes, my boy, Calvin, this may come as a great shock because I always told you that you better not climb this pole, but I'm here to tell you just the opposite. I needed to give you something to push back against so you could find your true self and become the hero you were meant to be. When I raised your mother and father, they always failed to get past the point of following the leader, never thinking for themselves. They taught others to never climb the pole. I knew you were different though. I knew you'd have the spiritual curiosity to reach for greatness. Even through uncertainty, you looked to the heavens and unlocked something greater. I was overcome with tears, releasing waves of grief locked inside from across my repressed childhood. But Grandpa, why is that other group of children also possessed by this energy? Grandpa didn't seem to have an answer for that and kind of ignored the question. With teary eyes, I said goodbye to my grandpa, who I felt move on into the ethereal afterlife. I climbed down the pole and hugged my friends who were back to normal. Nanja Ika Rose looked at me with dreamy eyes, sensing something significant had happened. I saw safety in her eyes, and together we knew the darkness was over. I went on to become the youngest mayor of Wallace, but I led the town differently than my parents had shepherded our family. Instead of saying, "You better not climb that pole," I instead encouraged everyone in the town differently. Find the biggest pole you can and climb to the top, my children, for perched in its pinnacle, you will find your greatest treasure. Pole position. As far back as I can remember, all I've ever wanted to be was a race car driver. Sounds like a boy's dream. Well, prepare to have the rug pulled out from underneath you. Are you ready? I hope you're sitting down when I reveal the fact that I'm a girl. That's right. There I was, a 12-year-old in Raleigh, North Carolina, wanting more than anything to drive a Chevy Monte Carlo across the finish line, breathing in the fresh scent of that waving checkered flag. The problem was that my home life was equally checkered. I remember one morning waking up and rubbing my bleary eyes, smelling that familiar smell of nabob coffee, and seeing my dad reading the paper. He was muttering about how a small town in Idaho had apparently elected its youngest mayor in history or something. Nothing I found interesting, but I love my dad. Mom unfortunately suffered from severe depression, making it hard for her to, well, to be honest, be a mom. Bedridden each morning, she relied on my father to manage more and more tasks until it was clear that at the end of each long suffering day, he was running on fumes. Many of those fumes came from the exhaust pipes of the powerful vehicles featured in NASCAR. What I mean by this is that my father and I had a nighttime ritual of putting Mom to bed before we'd watch the races. Hearing the iconic voices of Adam Alexander and Jamie Little give us a play-by-play of the NASCAR drivers, giving their everything to take the Benchington Cup. Coming up on the left, it's Big Buck Lewis, driving a Ford Coupe with modified rear manifold. Buck has been huge this year, but he's going to need to stay on the gas pedal to keep ahead of Richard Petty, who has dominated the racetrack for years now. That's a real example of dialogue you'd hear in NASCAR, and that's a true quotation from the television set. But I digress. The next morning, we woke up to grave news. We'd received a call from the frantic wife of the elderly Douglas family down the street. It seems that in the wee hours of the morning, a drunk driver had collided with a power pole, knocking it against their house and smashing into the attic. Mr. Douglas was in the attic at the time, and apparently the structural damage had him pinned in place. He had a particular medicine he needed to take this morning, otherwise his metabolic disorder put him at risk of having a stroke. I heard my dad say desperately, "Damn it, Martha! I care for your situation, but why are you calling me? Get the police on this." "You know as well as I do they don't come to this neighborhood," is probably what Martha said, but I couldn't tell because telephones work so that only the person having the conversation can hear what the other person says. My dad's grave reaction strongly suggested that I was right, however. We rushed outside, but in that moment the wind picked up again, blowing another tree down. I still wake up uneasy sometimes, remembering what my father had said when the tree struck him. "Ah, the tree got me," he wailed in a voice no daughter ever wants to hear. "I'm okay, honey. I think I have a broken rib though, and I'm pinned for now. But I'm not in danger. Becky, listen. You've wanted to drive cars since before you were even born. I've always told you that with cars comes more responsibility than anything else in life. Well, today, I'm handing you responsibility beyond anything I've asked before. I'm handing you," my father choked up, my eyes filled with tears, mirroring his own emotions, signaling the significance of this initiation. "I'm handing you the keys." He said some other things that honestly I couldn't really hear because the wind was very strong and he's always kind of a low talker. But what I took it that he said was that I needed to drive on site and climb the pole to provide Mr. Douglas with his medication, biding time for the professionals to come sort the situation. Before I knew it, I was hopping behind the wheel of my father's prized Nash Ambassador. I put the clutch into place, carefully timing its engagement with the gas pedal, just as I'd practice in my room every night for the last decade. Would I get the timing right? With astonished relief, the car shifted into first gear, and I shifted into the greatest purpose of my young life. My dream of driving was about to save a life. Arriving on site, Mrs. Douglas gave me a knowing look. She handed me her husband's serum, and I knew what I had to do. In all honesty, it was more so driving the car that was significant for me. The pole wasn't particularly hard to climb, and providing the medication to Mr. Douglas was perhaps a bit anticlimactic. For some reason, I feel the emphasis of my story should be more so about climbing the pole that had fallen against their house. But f*** it, this is my story. I returned home to find my father napping peacefully under the other fallen tree and thought to myself, this town seriously was not prepared for a windstorm. I gently woke him up and let him know Dr. Douglas was safe and that the ambassador was tucked back into the garage. I knew I could count on you, sweetie. I'm truly proud of you, though not surprised one bit. From that day forward, my dad asked me to drive around town to take care of errands. I had earned it. While the legal consequences of driving as a minor put a financial burden on our family, I'd like to think the meaning and freedom was worth it. When I think back, I'll never cease to believe that storm came for a reason. Thank Raleigh for your weather, and thank you, Dad, for believing in me. You gonna climb that pole, boy? I'd like to tell you a story about our family, the Bates family. My name is Jimmy. As far back as I can remember, my family had encouraged myself and my 3 brothers to climb any sort of objects we come across. Now I know what you're thinking. What is a homely Maritimes family doing telling their kids to climb up things? How does this make sense? Are you insane? Have you gone insane when you say things like that? Hold back your questions. I'd like to explain. If our family was religious, my mother's family was a damn near cult. Conservative would be putting it lightly. She was raised with such flagrant limitations to her freedom that it's any wonder that she had any room left at all to express her personality. But against the odds, she did. She found a new relationship to spirituality, viewing the universe as supportive and moving us all towards our important individual purposes and notes to play in the greater cosmic song. Such wasn't the case for her family of origin, however. Worse than that, her family had raised her with a strict rule that under no circumstances were her and her 7 brothers and sisters to climb up anything, especially poles, being that these denoted a crucifixion similarity. To climb to heights was viewed as a sort of antichrist action, competing with God in a Luciferian manner. To her parents, to climb a pole was basically to openly say, I am supporting our dark lord Satan. I'm practicing devil worship and I'm trying to overthrow God, such as in Milton's Paradise Lost. The dark part? This was only implied. No one actually ever said these words. The tragedy is that when her sister got trapped in the hills when they were young, she was met with the true darkness of her parents' rigid cult beliefs. Warning for those listening, this is truly gruesome. When her sister was stuck at elevation, her parents forced the children to leave her behind, coldly stating, "Your sister has chosen to make love to the devil. We can't save her now." To be with God is to avoid climbing objects such as poles, and even mountains technically count, so your sister is going to pass away. I still get chills thinking about this brutal reality that my mom lived through, even more so because it truly happened. So now you understand why in our family, Mom constantly encouraged that we climb to new heights, symbolic of a different experience of spirituality where we were to embody and become divinity, not just witness from the shameful self-imposed limitations of our cursed humanity. Then one morning I saw it, the newspaper ad that would change my life. A small classified ad that simply said, "Pole climbing contest, 6 p.m. Friday at the old quarry." As if a force beyond my ordinary will was carrying me, I jumped on my bicycle and pedaled emphatically to the quarry, ignoring the fact that it was 11 a.m. I was very early, and in some sense did need to include that in this story, but I'm not a professional author. When 6 p.m. rolled around, I glanced about at the rare type who dared to soar above the ordinary. There were about 14 of us, a range of age and gender, but with something in common. It's like everybody's eyes had seen something special, been somewhere. I felt understood in ways I never had outside our family. These people were here to climb. First up, a woman who looked young but carried herself as someone much older who went by Sideswipe approached the pole. I felt as if others would be equally deafened by my pounding heart as I watched her take her first wiggly undulations up the pole, using a piece of tough fabric as a ballast to drag herself upwards. She reached the top, gave a shriek of victory, and slowly found her way back down. 4 minutes and 47 seconds. Impressive. I watched this continue several times until it was my turn. I'll never forget the mysterious event orchestrator, who honestly never gave any rationale whatsoever or sense of the purpose or even reward of this strange event, look at me with his one more protrusive eye and say in a thick prospector accent, "You gonna climb that pole, boy?" You're goddamn right I am. Before you'd even have time to groom a Pekingese, my hands were around the pole, hugging it like the reunion of estranged lovers. I shuffled up, feeling each slide grinding into me. Friction, heat, warmth. The sensation was too much. Halfway up, I felt splinters digging into my flesh like the biting words of my grandparents. As each molten hot sliver penetrated my flesh like so many arrows, my mind flashed with ancestral memory of my aunt, who was left behind in the mountains for dead. Suddenly, she came to me. "Jimmy, this is Frederica. I'm able to speak with you because you are fairly high on this service pole, high enough that you've crossed the threshold into spiritual alignment. People don't realize that making contact with higher dimensional entities is fairly easy and largely just requires going up a pole with a heart that is pure. We don't have much time. I don't fault my parents for what they did. Their idea of religion was conditioned from fear and projecting their own emotional burden onto the heavens. The reality of cosmos is infinitely more beautiful than their limited dogmas. It's up to you and your family to spread the word that climbing telephone poles is but one way to penetrate the firmament of eternity and spread love across Earth and beyond it." Ooh. What was that last sound you made? What do you mean? You went like, ooh, or something. Did I? Yeah, it's hard to explain. You know, I don't even have a body, right? Anyways, I have to go. Climb fast, Jimmy. Eternity is at stake. Climbing a pole to heaven? Now that's what I call high stakes. With renewed energy, I burst to the top almost in one swift movement. The feeling of slivers was replaced with the ecstasy of higher purpose. Before I knew it, I was to the top and back to the bottom, the others' faces agape with astonishment that I had made it to the top in under 2 minutes. The prospector-voiced orchestrator revealed that he too had long suspected climbing poles would reveal the hero of our generation who would transcend dimensions and help to add synchrony to our region, long corrupted by dogmatic religion at the expense of true divinity. I headed home, abuzz with new possibility and excited to share with my mother that I had closed the loop, helped Frederica to move on in peace, and that things wouldn't be the same moving forward. I'd learned the value of personal agency and forgiveness. Whenever I find myself impatient with others, I remember the remarkable forgiveness of Frederica's being and understand that even those who do great evil are trapped and need love in their own way.